Hello and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jabe. I'm Jabe Jabelson, and this week we are going to learn how to build an AWS Lambda function to email yourself a daily quote. Now, why would you want to email yourself a daily quote? Well, I don't exactly know, but for those people that love to read and take notes and highlight all their favorite quotes, we'll go ahead and get our hands dirty with some Python, messing around with AWS Lambda functions, and figure out how we can send ourselves an email with a random quote from a list we've already created each and every morning to start our day. Now, as far as requirements go, we're going to need Python 3.6 or newer. We'll need a Google Drive account because we're going to be storing all of our favorite quotes in Google Sheets. You'll need a GitHub account, and lastly, a paid AWS account. Now, for the most part, this is pennies to run this function once a day, every day. But just be careful you don't keep this thing running, every minute, or you can start to rack up that AWS bill. So, without further ado, bon appetit. All right, before you get started, you're going to need a Google Sheet with all of your quotes that you're going to want to email yourself. Now, I'll link to this one that you can copy as a template. Feel free to take my quotes. I don't care. You might not have the same interests. But really all it is just going to be a Google Sheet with a column of quotes. We could have a few other things. I added a key takeaway as well as the book title to help us add a little context, because when you have a long list, it's always nice to know where this came from. So that's the first thing you're going to need. Now, to get started in the GitHub desktop app, we're going to go ahead and create a new repository. For this one, we will call this the daily email bot, and you want to make sure you have your path. And the last thing is add this gitignore file for Python, because we're going to have some sensitive information that we don't want to upload. So go ahead and create that repository. And here you have the option. We're going to go ahead and open this in Visual Studio Code. Let's click this button and see what happens. Great, we're in our Visual Studio Code, and what we're going to do is start a new terminal here. And this terminal, to start, we're going to use a virtual environment, and your future self will thank you for using a virtual environment whenever possible. It basically keeps the code contained and makes it more replicable, since all the dependencies and site packages are in one place. And people do virtual environments and set them up in different ways, but what we're going to do is create one with Python 3-m and just call it vem. And here we are installing it, and once installed, we activate it with this command, source vem bin activate, and we'll see that our virtual environment is activated whenever we have this vem before our daily email bot get. Great, so next thing we want to do is install any packages that don't come with the default Python. The first package we're going to use is gspread, which is basically a Python API for Google Sheets. So it's a wrapper that accesses Google Drive, Google Sheets, Google Docs, and so forth, and does it in the Python API. So it makes it very easy to interact with it, to where we can connect to it, pull our quotes, get certain values in those specific cells, and then save them into variables and do something with it. So here at the installation, we see it's pip install gspread. For our instance, since we have Python 3, let's go back to our terminal in VS Code. And we're going to say pip3 install gspread, and let's go ahead and do that. And again, the gspread documentation is very clear if you need to see it. We'll walk through it kind of one by one here. Next up, we're going to connect to our Google Sheet. Okay, we're going to go to the Google Developer Console, which is part of the Google Cloud platform. Should be free to create. And in general, for this daily email, we're going to treat it as a bot, which is going to be using a service account. And so basically at a high level, what we're going to do is we're going to enable API access for a project. We'll create a new project, enable API access, create credentials where we'll get this service account key. We'll share that with our sheet, our service account, so we have access to actually read in the cells and values. Then we're going to go ahead and get this JSON file, which stores all of this information, and put it into our virtual environment so we can reference that and basically grant access for the project. So first thing we need to do is create a new project, which here we'll go to create project, and let's call it daily email AWS bot, not part of any organization. Hit create. And once created, we want to enable our API access for the project. So on our left-hand side, you'll see this APIs and services. Let's go ahead, we can just click it. And here you'll see this enable APIs and services button. Go ahead and select that. And within the library, we're going to search for two things. First is Google Drive. Here we enable this. And the second one we want to add is the Sheets API. And we'll enable this one as well. So back on our APIs and services screen, we should see this credentials option. We're going to go ahead and click the credentials. And within that, we should be able to create credentials. And we're going to have a few different options. We are going to go with the service account. So let's select that. And we'll fill out the appropriate information, create and continue. Optional, we're not going to give it a role right now. Let's just go ahead and hit done. And now that we're here, we're going to go to this manage service accounts. And once there, in these actions, we'll go to manage keys. And we can add a key where we're basically creating a new key. Create a new key. And the selected recommended type is JSON. Again, I said this is going to save all this key information into a JSON file, and that's what we're going to have to use in our Python code to say, hey, Google Sheets API, GSpread, you can play nice with what we're building here. So let's go ahead and hit create. It's going to download. I'm in Google Chrome, so it will download in this bottom bar. And what I'm going to do is just move this into the folder that I'm using, because once there, we can go to VS Code, and let's take a look at it. And you see we'll have private keys, has our project ID, and what we need from here is we actually need the client email because we're going to share this from our Google Sheet, just as we would if we were sharing any other Google account. So let's go to our Google Sheet that we own. We go up to the share, and here I'm going to add that service account. Now, back within VS Code, one thing we want to do is let's add this .json file to our gitignore to make sure it doesn't get uploaded when we add this to our GitHub repo and make that public. And again, since I added the JSON to the root folder, we're able to specify the path using the service account function, which again we'll get to in a short moment in time. Okay, in our root folder, let's go ahead and create a new file, and we're going to call it daily_email.py. It'll be a Python file. And we're ready to start writing some of our code now that we've done all the fun stuff behind the scenes. So at a high level, this Python script is going to connect to our Google Sheet, which has all of our quotes. It will select a random row, then read in the column, the quote column from that row, and save it into a variable. So to get started, let's dive into the Google Sheets portion of this. And what we're going to need to do is import this GSpread module that we installed. We're also going to need the ability to get a random integer, and we'll import a few other things needed to send the email later on. So jumping back to the GSpread documentation, what we first have to do is authenticate GSpread, right? So all of that information we just got in that JSON file, we're going to go ahead and put it in our script to say, hey, we can authenticate with this sheet. And since we're storing our credential files somewhere else, we need to specify the path to our JSON file, right? So we can go ahead and copy this. And here, we basically need this path to our JSON file. Now, since we're in the same root directory, we can actually just take this path and go ahead and paste it in here. Again, since we're already in the daily email bot folder, we can delete everything up to there, and voila. We are just saying, hey, go get the file name with that JSON file where we have all of that information stored. Now in the gspread documentation, we need to open our spreadsheet. Now we can do it in a few different ways, either open it by the title, or we can open it by the key, or we can do it by the URL. Now I find the key to be the most effective. So let's go ahead and copy this. And this key we need to replace with the one from our Google Sheet. So if you go to your Google Sheet, the key is actually in between the /d ahead of this /edit. So that will be our key that we'll copy, and we'll paste it here. And now we're authenticating, and then we're opening our spreadsheet by key, and we're saving it to this sheet 1. Let's go ahead and just call it a worksheet, since that's how it's referenced in some other places. And within that worksheet, we actually want to get a specific tab, right? So this is saying open up that Google Sheet in its entirety, but we want to get our tab. If you look here, we have this quotes template, and that's what we need. So to get that specific tab, which again here is called worksheet, we can do it in a few different ways, by index, by title, or again, just by calling it sheet 1, which is usually the default, but that's not what ours is because we renamed it. So for ours, we're going to go ahead and use the get worksheet and go by index, since it will be the first one, since it's the first tab, which will be index 0. So to get that sheet that will be accessing this worksheet variable we saved, and basically getting that worksheet and getting the 0 index position. So we authenticated, we opened that by key to get our worksheet, and within our worksheet we got our sheet. And now we basically need to get a cell within that, but first we want to get a random row. So to get that, we want to get this the length of the sheet to make sure we're pulling from all of our quote options, right? But if I add a new sheet, we don't want to come back and update that Python code, so we'll have this be a little bit more dynamic where it's always taking the length of the sheet. So the last row with a cell filled out will always be included here. And let's save this into this X variable. And then basically what we're telling it to do is get a random row, and that's going to be that rand_int function that we imported in, and basically saying take a number between 0 and the length of the sheet, which is X, and save that to that random row number. And so the next thing we need to do is get that cell value, right? So within our template, we basically say, hey, if there's a lot of rows, always go find that last row all the way down here. And so always go to that last row, which would be 777 here as the length. And we're going to get that random integer, and we need one of these cells, which again is going to be this quote within here. So to get that specific cell value, we basically are saying, hey, go access it by the A1 notation or the cell coordinates. And so what we're going to do is just by the cell coordinates, since we already have the random row and we know which value the quote is in. So here we take that sheet, and we're basically passing in the random row into the X, and then 2 into the Y, and that will go ahead and be saved, and that will go ahead and we'll get the value, right? So that's going to give us the actual text. And we'll go ahead and save that in as the quote variable. So we're going into our cell, right, our length, so it can be any row in between 0 and our length, and we'll go get that second column, which again, 0, 1, 2, it's using the 0 index, and we're saving that into the quote. And just to show that we're doing things right, let's go ahead and print that quote. So let's save this and run it. We have our title, so 2 actually jumping over the sheet. 2 is our book title, so it actually starts at 1, 2, our quote would be 3, our key takeaway would be 4. But you'll see, it went, basically found a random row and gave back this building microservice designing fine grade system. So let's just search for this, and we see this took, somewhere either row 717 to 729, gave us that second column. Awesome, appears to be working. Next up is sending our information, the title and the quote, via email. And now in the script, we have to open an SMTP connection. That's our email connection. We'll authenticate with Gmail, and then we'll send the outbound email to ourself. First thing we need to do is open the connection, right? So this is going to create this SMTP object. We're saying it's coming from Gmail, and you got to add in this 587, and then we'll add in these next two lines, which again, don't know exactly what they're doing, but this is a pretty common way to open the SMTP connection and save it to an object. So from here, what we need is our Gmail username and Gmail password. And I got a little ahead of myself, but what you need to do is we actually need to install one more module, which is going to be this python-dotenv module. So if we actually go over here, it's this python-dotenv. We'll pip install it with python/dotenv, and it basically allows us to access some of our environment variables that will save into this .env file, right? So we created this new file that's .env. In our git ignore, you'll notice we have it in our environment. So whatever we put in this .env file is not going to be uploaded to GitHub. So in this .env, we're going to export out our Gmail username and Gmail password. So our username, pretty straightforward. The password would just be your Gmail password. However, if you have two-factor authentication enabled, which I highly recommend, then you actually need to get an app-specific password. Over here, you can, I'll link to this, you can sign in with app passwords, which basically you're creating a very specific password for a given app, giving it restricted access, and then you're going to take that password and we'll use that in our .env file. So here we have this information, and we basically need to access it by calling this os.getenv and getting our username and password and saving them into a variable with our username and password. So at the top, what I added into our code is importing os, which comes at all Python 3 and newer packages, and then we're getting this .env module from our load.env method from this .env module, which we imported in the terminal down here. I did it before. File didn't upload because my internet speed cut out, so you need to trust me. And then we need to initialize it by calling this load_.env in the brackets. And so basically what that allows us to do is say, hey, go into this .env file, get our username and save it in here. Do the same for our password. And we need that because in our login on that SMTP object, we're going to pass in our username and password. So that will basically allow us to authenticate with Gmail. So actually sending the information, we're going to create this sent from, this to, and this body variable. In the sent from, we'll say it's coming from our email, even though it's going to that same email. Helps to fill out the subject line field. And then, we're not going to have a specific subject line. It will pull from our the first line in the email if we don't have it. So we can just say subject, daily quote. We'll add in some breaks, and then we're going to access these two variables, which are going to be the title and the quote, which again, we got here from our Google Sheet. And then the last thing we basically need to do is create this, or send this email, and we'll print if there's an error. Otherwise, it's going to send it, and then it's going to, at the end, quit this SMTP object, which we initiated earlier. So if we were to run this, we should see the title and the quote printed still because we are still printing it in our script, or actually we'll just print the quote. And then we'll double check that this authentication worked. So if we run it, we see we get our random quote, and I checked my email client, and I promise you I did receive the email. Let's see if I can show you here on my phone. You'll see I got this new email. And it has the Tao of physics, if one is satisfied with an approximate understanding of nature, and that is matching if one is satisfied with an approximate understanding of nature. Awesome. So the last step is setting up a daily Lambda function on AWS. Let's get to it. Okay, in your AWS account, you need to sign in, and we're going to create a function under the Lambda management console. So where is Lambda here under compute? We'll click on Lambda, and we're going to go ahead and create a new function. We're going to author it from scratch. The function name will be daily email send. The runtime is going to be Python 3.9. And under permissions, if we go to change default execution, we want to go ahead and create a new role with basic Lambda functions. No need to go to the advanced settings. Go ahead and create this function. So we have our daily email send function, and first thing we're going to do is configure our trigger. So let's add a trigger. The trigger type is going to be an event bridge, which used to be the CloudWatch event. We'll create a new rule. It's going to be the daily email bot event trigger. And we want to schedule the expression using our cron job. So I believe we can do cron. I need to move out of the way over to the right, and we want that to go Monday to Friday. I think that's it. I will double check if that's not. I'll go ahead and update it in the blog post itself. Go ahead and hit add. And next thing we need to do is actually modify our functions code. Now you could do it all in here, but what we're actually going to do is update the code in our local file and handle a few things from there. So the first thing we need to do is basically add this Lambda handler with the event and context at the top of our script. So if we go to VS Code, basically everything below here, we're going to now take this, indent it once so it's part of this function. Let's get rid of this print statement now. So everything is within this Lambda handler event, and that's important to basically talk to AWS and tell it what to do. And so if we're back in here, instead of writing it all, we're going to actually upload it from a zip file. But what that means is we actually need to go and zip everything up. And since we have a virtual environment, it's a little bit trickier than what you might expect. So if we look here, we have our .m, we have our getIgnore, we have our daily email, and we have our JSON. So within the getIgnore, let's make sure we have our JSON file. Great. And what we're going to do now is go through the process of zipping everything. We'll do it from the terminal, and we'll zip everything up and create this one package that has everything needed, including our Python code, which now has this Lambda handler, and our JSON file, which has the necessary information, which previously we were calling in this, we were calling right in this service account. But since this file name is actually going to be within a zip folder, we need to make sure it's included in there. So what we're going to do is deactivate our virtual environment to start, which we can do with just saying deactivate. We see it's deactivated because we no longer have our venv. And then we're going to go ahead and cd into our venv lib. We had Python 3.9 into our site packages. So we hit that, and now we're within our site packages within our virtual environment. And here we want to basically zip up all of our site packages. Those are all the dependencies, right? Which is basically gspread. The .env will include, but we don't necessarily need it because AWS has a different way to handle environment variables. But we now need to basically zip it all up with the zip-r. And again, you need to make sure we go back to the root. And we'll save this as just my deployment package .zip. And with this command, we're saying, hey, zip all of this up, but go save it back at the root folder, right, of this daily email bot, and call it my deployment package.zip. So we run this, zipping everything up, and now here we see we have our zip folder. And again, let's go to our getIgnore and let's make sure we're not uploading our zip file by adding this .zip here, right? So now we're not uploading the zip to GitHub as well. So we'll have everything on GitHub we can access, but on our AWS, a little bit more secure. It won't be public. It's only for us. No one will get all of this important information, which is basically the JSON, which is now within the zip file. Okay, so we have this deployment package zip, but we also need to add in our daily email folder, right? So right now we're at the site packages. We need to get out of there by doing cd, and we'll go up 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're back at our daily email bot root folder, and here we're basically going to add with this -g command to the my deployment package zip. We want to add this daily email .py file, right? So we're adding this to the zip, and then we also want to add our daily email AWS bot/d, and if I hit tab, it should finish that. So we're now adding the JSON file and the Python file to all of the modules and packages that we already zipped up. So it's basically adding to it and re-zipping it. So let's go ahead and save that. We've added it. Great. So now our deployment package is finally includes everything we need, which has our daily email Python file, which has this Lambda handler event, right? So it's basically going to run everything that we just created, connect and send it. It has the JSON file, which we access here in this file name for the service account to authenticate with Gspread. And lastly, it has the environment variables, but it's actually not going to be able to access that because the load.env will do it at the AWS level just in case to make sure we have everything that's needed. So if we head back to AWS, we should now be able to upload our zip file. And let's go ahead and upload. And we'll upload our package zip. Boom, hit save. Great, we see it here. It's too large of a file to enable inline code editing. But one last thing we need to be careful of is in this handler info, the Lambda function, we actually didn't call it a Lambda function. We gave it a specific name, and that's daily_email. So let's edit this to just make sure it's calling that daily_email file and then calling that Lambda handler event we have within there. So we hit save. Awesome. And then the last thing we need to do is we can go to configuration and our environment variables, and let's edit this by adding to the first one being our Gmail username and the second one being our Gmail password. And again, within our .env file, we're basically pulling that same value, that same information, save that, and now we have our environment variables. And there you have it, your daily email with some of your favorite quotes using Python, AWS, and Google Sheets, the Gspread. I'm Jabe Jabelson. I hope you enjoyed that. Again, check out many more videos across a lot of different things as we learn to find a better way to copy pasta here. Until next time, I bid you adieu.